Department of Public Safety with the Public Information Office. We want to thank you for joining us today. The reason why we're here is we wanted to give you an outlet for the questions that you might have regarding the recent fatal collision and hazmat incident that occurred on I-10 at milepost 272 on the 14th of February. We brought several experts or people that were involved in some way, shape, or form in managing this incident so that we can try and answer as many of those questions as you might have. I want to thank the following people for coming to be with us today, who are going to be the panelists here that you'll be able to ask questions to. With the Arizona Department of Public Safety, we have Lieutenant Colonel Dustin Coleman Jr. He's the Assistant Director who oversees the Highway Patrol Division. We have Major Grant Benham, the Southern Patrol Bureau Commander. Captain Benjamin Bullard, he's the Commercial Vehicle Enforcement Captain, and he was also the incident commander for most of this incident, so he will be a good source. We also have Bart Graves here with us with our Public Information Office, and we have Raul Garcia as well from our Public Information Office. Sergeant Joshua Henson with the DPS Hazardous Materials Response Unit is also here with us today. And then for the Tucson Fire Department, we have Deputy Chief Baker and Deputy Chief Kearney. We have Dr. Mazda Shirazi. He's the Medical Director of the Arizona Poison and Drug Information Center. With ADOT, we have Rod Lane, who is the South Central District Engineer. We also have the Pima County Office of Environmental Quality here with us today. And with them we have Natalie Shep, who is their Public Information Officer. And we have the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality here as well, Carolyn Oppelman and Archangel Berrigan. And with that, I will go ahead and have Colonel Coleman come up, and he's going to give us a synopsis of how the incident began.
Good afternoon. As stated, I'm Dustin Coleman, the Assistant Director of the Arizona Highway Patrol Division at the Department of Public Safety. On Wednesday, February 14, 272 eastbound, troopers and units from Tucson Fire responded and found a commercial vehicle on its left side in the median at this location. The vehicle had been transporting nitric acid, which is a hazardous material. The containers of nitric acid were ruptured during the rollover and began to leak into the median. The driver of the commercial vehicle was found deceased in the cab of the vehicle. We're going to have experts come up and be able to explain the different facets of this investigation to give you a clearer picture of what we were working with on that day and the day after. Before they get into that, there was 13 different entities and public safety agencies involved in this investigation. The cooperation we have with Southern Arizona partners that the Department of Public Safety works with on a daily basis can not be said enough how well we work together, and phone calls, radio calls, everybody responds with the same goal, and that is public safety and the safety of the citizens of Tucson in this case. So I wanted to publicly thank our partners down here. No one agency can handle this investigation or this type of incident alone. It takes partnerships to make sure the citizens of Tucson are safe. To the troopers and the command staff from the Department of Public Safety that responded down, your professionalism is duly noted. You handled this situation above reproach, and I want to publicly thank everybody that was involved in this investigation. And I will now turn it back over to you. Thank you.
Right, we've got Captain Benjamin Bullard. Again, I mentioned he was our incident commander for most of this incident, so we're going to bring him up and let him give you some information as well.
Afternoon. Again, my name is Ben Bullard. I'm a captain with the Department of Public Safety assigned to the Commercial Motor Vehicle Unit South. The division that we run is the Commercial Motor Vehicle Task Force, which is comprised of a little over 60 members of the Department of Public Safety, and then a large contingent of officers that are assigned from the Arizona Department of Motor Vehicle in the commercial motor vehicle realm. I'm going to walk you through chronologically the basic chain of events that took place the day of and the day following of the 14th, just to kind of give you an overview of what occurred. After receiving the call of the rollover collision, the troopers, along with myself and fire, responded. Once we got on scene, it was established that we had nitric acid that was leaking from the back of the commercial motor vehicle, and that we had a plume that was blowing to the north-northeast. It was at that time that we worked with our partners at ADOT and came up with a traffic control plan and a long-term route to divert traffic up Colt Road, across Valencia, eastbound, and back down to Houghton, to the interstate, and then the reversed for westbound traffic. Immediately after beginning that process and contemporaneously with that, we began hard evacuations of the Vail Academy from the Vail School District, which was located to the northwest of the scene, and the Raytheon and U of A partners in the U of A Science Park, which was located northeast of the scene. We also immediately shut down Science Park Drive, which is the east-west roadway just north of the interstate in that Science Park. It is a public roadway, and we needed to keep people out of that area, so we closed it down. After closing that roadway down and establishing our traffic plan, we ensured that we had hazardous materials response en route. The Department of Public Safety's hazardous materials team, along with the Tucson fire team, responded and began to assess the nature of the hazardous materials response. Working together in unified command with the Tucson Fire Department, the Tucson Police Department, the Pima County Sheriff's Office, and the Department of Transportation, we began to come up with a long-term mitigation plan to mitigate the effects of the closure, the hazardous materials, and the investigation. Throughout the afternoon, we worked to begin mitigation after we finished our evacuation efforts. Only one residence was evacuated, and it was the residence that was immediately south. During the investigation and while we were continuing our initial response, there was a small fire in the median that was caused by the hazardous materials. That fire then extended underneath the interstate, just south of the interstate, at which time the fire department was able to approach safely and extinguish the flames to keep it from burning any further south. As the day went on, we began mitigation efforts and communication efforts between the chain of command, unified command, and our PIOs, and we started to put information out through our PIO offices to the local emergency management office. As we got closer to the evening, we implemented a plan for overnight operations on scene. We had our hazmat response team on scene by then, and the decision was made that we were going to mitigate by bringing in loads of dirt to cover the hazardous material in the median. Throughout the evening, weather conditions were unfavorable, and those conditions led to an additional plume developing later in the morning, or pardon me, earlier in the morning around the 3 to 4 a.m. mark, which is what necessitated a expansion of our shelter-in-place order that had been given earlier, had been rescinded, and then was reissued, was the fact that the on-scene conditions changed due to the weather. Our hazardous materials response team was involved with the National Weather Service and with their partners in establishing what the plume was going to do as the interaction with the water that we received from the weather came. The following morning, we pushed out the 3-mile shelter in place after we had additional unfavorable weather conditions, and the plume modeling from our hazardous materials partners told us that we needed to do that. We pushed that message out through our unified command and our PIOs, and then throughout the day we started to mitigate the remainder of the hazardous materials that were there. It was pretty close to 6 o'clock yesterday evening when we were given the all clear by the hazardous materials response team that we could start taking down our closures and terminate both the shelter in place and the evacuation orders. As part of this, the driver of the motor vehicle was found to be deceased in the cab of the vehicle, and I'm prepared to provide you with that name if you're ready to take it. The decedent was identified as Ricky Immel, I-M-M-E-L, who was a 54-year-old male from Nevada. The service dog that was traveling with him was located by a resident south of the scene. The family of the deceased did make contact with the Department of Public Safety and with Pima County, and their service dog is going to be returned to the family. I think that's about all I have to provide at this time. I don't know if you want to have me take questions or you want to introduce everybody else and have to.
Why don't we go ahead and take questions since you're up there, and then if we have specific questions for other areas, we can have them step up to the mic at that time.
Okay.
Can you, Craig Smith from KGUN TV in Tucson, can you shed any light on the cause, and was the condition of the driver a factor in any way? When we heard service dog, we were thinking, well, did he have some sort of condition associated that might be relevant here?
So that condition isn't one that I have information on. I can say that the investigation is ongoing, but at this point, we have no reason to believe that high speed, that drugs or alcohol are involved in this case. There weren't any other vehicles that we're aware of that were involved in the collision itself. At this time, there's the possibilities that we had a fatigued driver. One of the things that we did investigate and found to be within the Federal Motor Carrier regulations was the hours of service that the driver had. He was well within the expected hours of service, so there were no violations regarding fatigue driving that we can establish through the means of looking at records. There may have been a medical issue. We won't know the outcome of that until the Pima County OME provides the results of their autopsy, which will probably be sometime in the next 3 weeks.
Did you have a chance to examine the truck and trailer itself, any potential equipment issues or anything like that?
We were only able to do a cursory examination of the truck and trailer at this point due to the nature of the hazardous materials and it having to be decontaminated. Also, the events of the collision caused some damage that made it difficult for us to establish some of the mechanical issues that we would normally inspect.
Did I hear correctly? You don't think other drivers played a role in perhaps causing a situation dangerous to the truck?
We do not. From the investigation to this point, it appears that the truck was traveling eastbound on Interstate 10 when it gradually left the left side of the roadway into the median, at which point it got into an uneven section of ground and rolled over onto its left side, coming to rest facing east. So it's gradually left the road and rolled over onto its side, which very often is indicative of either a fatigue driver or someone who's had some sort of medical event that led to the loss of control of the vehicle.
I heard there was speculation about wind. Could that have been a factor in this case?
It could have been a factor. We don't have any real way to establish that would or would not have been the cause. I don't know the specific wind velocities that were that day. In my experience, it's very high wind that would cause that. Other states have experienced that. It's not something we experience, especially in the southern part of our state, that wind velocity is high enough to blow over a loaded semi.
Shelby with 30.
I just have 2 quick questions. Can you confirm Landstar Trucking owns that shipping container?
They do.
They do. And then, did Rick work for that company, or did he work for a separate company? Was he
So I'm going to have to defer to someone in the back of the room. Is it a leased company? Is the tractor leased?
Owner-operator.
So it's an owner-operator who's leased to Landstar Inway.
I am Tammy Donnelly from the Arizona Daily Star. Do you know where the truck was going?
I have to pull up the piece of paper that has their destination. It was going to a company in Theodore, Alabama.
Thank you.
When we heard leak, we originally thought, well, tank truck, and then we find that it's a regular box-type trailer. How is this chemical packaged, and is that regarded as a safe way to carry chemicals of that nature?
So in reference to safety, the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration is the administration within the federal government that sets guidelines regarding the transportation of hazardous materials in the U.S. Those guidelines are adopted by the state of Arizona through a rules adoption, and we enforce those regulations as the state of Arizona through those rules. The packaging that was used were plastic totes designed for the carrying of this hazardous material that are surrounded by reinforced metal cages. There were 13 totes that were in this vehicle, and from our investigation, it appears that the packaging and transport of this hazardous material was within the Federal Motor Carrier Guidelines. All right, that's it. I'm going to pass it off to the captain.
Well, I'm not sure whether this should be directed to you or someone else. We've had just questions from viewers who go, well, you know, is there any persistent health issues for themselves, for animals, for anything else? I mean, I don't know who would be best to pick that one up.
We have another expert that's better suited to answer that question.
That would be a good question for Dr. Strauss.
Dr. Strauss?
I got a question.
Okay.
So the nitric acid, when it spilled, had a high concentration. When it comes in contact with metals, especially chrome, any metal that has zinc in it, stainless steel, it can release what is known as nitrogen dioxide and nitrogen oxides. And that's that red plume that everybody saw. And that actually was what we were able to identify within minutes, that this is nitric acid till it was confirmed that it is nitric acid coming in contact with metal and producing that. So if you have contact with the plume at high concentration, so pretty much standing within what I would say feet, tens of feet of the plume for tens of minutes, there is a possibility that you would develop pulmonary edema, respiratory disease, delayed, meaning 12 to 24 hours later. In terms of the spread, whether this can go far, this is a gas that's heavier than air, so it tends to actually land. That night we had both rain and we had also snow that helps precipitate this down. If you see the color of red, color of yellow on a surface, I wouldn't go tasting it. I wouldn't go rubbing it on my skin. But again, it's unlikely that this would have traveled that far.
So would it be fair to say it's a limited hazard to people, properties, pets, or even wild animals?
It would be a correct assumption to say yes, that it would be a very limited hazard.
Anyone else? Do you know the quantity of the material? I've got a question relayed to me that they thought it was something in the neighborhood of 40,000 pounds.
So 18,200 kilograms of hazardous material were located within those 13 totes. All of that was spilled onto into the median and has since been mitigated by covering it with dirt.
Two questions. What type of environmental measures were taken to protect the ground and air, and are there any future impacts of that, spreading all over that grass and anything out there?
I think I'm going to defer to you.
So sorry.
Sergeant Hinson with the Department of Public Safety, supervisor of the hazmat response unit. And I apologize, can you repeat that? It sounded like that was a two-part question.
It was a two-part. What type of environmental measures were taken, and could there be any future impacts from this nitric acid?
Okay, so the environmental impact, for us to mitigate it, primary concern is life safety. So burying it in the dirt was the option there. At that point, when it's in the dirt, no longer fuming, we've taken care of the life safety and it becomes an environmental cleanup at that point. The cleanup contractor and ADOT will go through the process of removing that dirt in their process to further make it safe from the environmental issue of it. And then what was the second part of your question, please?
Well, just to confirm, you said the dirt will be removed later?
The dirt will be removed later.
Okay. My second part of my question was, any future impacts from this acid spill?
No, there should not be any future impacts.
Do you have information on just the intervals of time that went by from the point where you knew there was a wreck, you closed the interstate, start issuing your shelters in place? What was the timeline? And are you satisfied with the speed at which that was executed?
So we received the call around 2:44. I believe we closed the road approximately 4 minutes before the top of the hour. So we had about a 14-minute total response, and between the time we received the call, we had officers on scene and began closing the roadway. It was within the next 10 to 15 minutes we started issuing evacuation orders and moving police officers into the areas to start those evacuations, and communicating through our dispatch to both the Vail School District and the Raytheon and U of A Tech Park to evacuate those areas. I was very happy with our response. We didn't have a whole lot of time that passed regarding any of that. The only timing issues we had really were with the confirmation in the early AM of the expansion and contraction of our shelter in place. Our actual evacuation took place very rapidly on scene and remained in effect the entire duration. So those that were immediately in any kind of danger, we evacuated within minutes, and they remained evacuated during the whole time. So the people at the highest risk, I'm very satisfied with the speed at which that occurred.
In the couple of minutes between recognizing the problem and getting the closures going, were there drivers exposed, and were they able to go through at pretty high speed, or were they just kind of bumper to bumper by that time because of the accident?
So we do know that there were some people, as evidenced by the fact that there's some video out there from different social media sites of people driving through or near the plume. Again, one of the things that we do know is that their exposure to that plume, it's something I actually followed up with throughout the day yesterday, was very minimal, and the exposure would have had to have been a much longer period of time than driving through it. At most of the time, the plume that was even near the ground wasn't very wide. As it got up into the air, it looked a lot bigger, but near the ground, it wasn't very wide. So those people that drove through it did so at a speed that it's very unlikely that they're going to see adverse effects from it.
You had the 1 mile and then the 3 mile and so on. Were you able to get a measurement on how far it actually spread compared to the cautionary areas you set up?
So there's a couple different pieces to that. So actual spread of the acid on the ground was well within a quarter of a mile there on scene. They dammed up the one area that with dirt where it was flowing and got it to stop before it proceeded into any waterway. In terms of how far the gas blew after the plume started to develop, it was blowing mostly to the north-northeast. I don't think we have a precise measurement for how far out it went. I do know that we had the hazmat unit deploy and actually answered some questions, and within about 100 yards of the plume in any one direction, we had no indication of a measurable amount of gas in the air.
Hopefully we'll never have one of these again, but if we do, should drivers just push through as quick as they can or take some other action?
So if you see a copper-colored gas in the air, you should avoid it at all costs. Don't drive through it. Don't come in contact with it. If for some reason you are stuck in it, extricate yourself as quickly as possible and seek out immediate medical attention.
Can you provide the name of the trucking company that was transporting the Landstar trailer?
So the trucking company that is responsible for this load is Landstar. I do not have the name of the company that's leased to Landstar handy. I can get that for you if you need me to.
Yeah, it said the captor appeared to say something along the lines of like Richard Ortega Trucking.
So what that would be is in the trucking industry, it's very common for individuals or smaller corporations to own one or multiple commercial motor vehicles, which would be the tractor portion of the truck tractor. And then they lease their services or the access to that vehicle to a major trucking company. Landstar is one of those companies that is a logistics company that moves commercial goods and commodities, and they basically hire out as a contract employee these companies. They lease the truck over to them, so the operating authority, which is the term we would use, is under Landstar. So they're the company that, for all intents and purposes, under a contractual agreement, owns the responsibility for the load.
Landstar owns the responsibility.
Yes, Landstar owns, they have a contract with this company, and they're basically contract employees of Landstar.
So they basically match the truckers with the loads.
Yes. And then, so in terms of Federal Motor Carrier Administration, you have to have operating authority, which means that you've applied with the Federal Motor Carrier Administration and been granted the legal authority to transport hazardous materials and commercial materials throughout the United States. For that to happen, they have to apply. They receive their operating authority, which is the DOT number that they're issued. And that operating authority are the ones that are responsible for that particular load. In this case, it's Landstar. There are owner-operators or smaller corporations who operate under their own operating authority as well. So sometimes you'll see a DOT number on the side of a truck that initially had their own operating authority, but they've leased their authority over to Landstar and they work for them.
We established he was going to Tennessee, but he was coming from where? Do you know?
McCarran, Nevada. And it wasn't Tennessee, it was Theodore, Alabama.
I was gonna say Theodore, Alabama.
Yes, ma'am.
A few more questions and we're done. Anything else? Thank you all. Thank you all for taking this. They'll be available should you have follow-up.
Thank you.